Alright, welcome to this second tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to go through the yellow sheets for each of the major units, starting with Civil War and Reconstruction. Remember that the Civil War and Reconstruction unit straddled the first and second semester, so we're just going to deal with the Reconstruction part for this final exam. Well, we'll go to the yellow sheet for that, and some of the questions that you need to remember here are what was Reconstruction? How did African Americans win and lose during this time period? How did the outcomes of Reconstruction affect the development of the United States? So these three questions here, you can see them outlined. Some other ideas to acknowledge are the different plans. Know the different plans. We had a sheet, a chart that showed the different plans. So we had the Lincoln Plan and the Johnson Plan and the Radical Republican Plan. So basically these terms here are the ones that you need to know, with the exception of we got rid of Hiram Revels, for instance, in sharecropping. So the Reconstruction plans, the Scalawags, Carpetbaggers, the KKK, the Redeemers, and then the other thing is we took a bunch of notes on how the Reconstruction ended, this Compromise of 1877. Make sure you know the ins and outs of how that came about, and it had to do with that election of 1876 and a compromise or a bargain that is struck. So that's it for the Reconstruction section of the exam. All right, so now we skip over the trial, and then we go to the next major unit here, which was Roots of the American Century. And that yellow sheet is here. And the question that we ask up here is, robber barons or captains of industry? This is from our trial. Make sure that you're able to answer that question using some specifics, and there's so many things that you could use. Go back to your trial sheets for that. The second question here is, what were the ideals of the progressives? And these ideals are nicely summarized way down here with DERPS. D, democracy. E, efficiency. R, regulation. P, prohibition. S, social justice. And remember to be able to identify one problem and one solution from each of these areas. Then moving down here, we have how did immigration laws change throughout the course of American history? Know the various kind of stages. The first stage being, if you could get yourself to the United States, you're welcome. You're going to have to wait a few years for full citizenship rights, but no one's going to kick you out. Until 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then you have two other time periods, the second time period being a quota system, numerical limits set per country based on a certain formula. It goes through a number of kind of incarnations, but it ends up being 2% of the population of a particular group that was here in 1890. And of course, the thing to remember is that favored old immigrants rather than new immigrants. And make sure you know the difference between old immigrants and new immigrants. And then finally here, what events and ideas caused the Spanish-American War? And then what debate did the Spanish-American War begin among Americans? The events and ideas caused are in a set of notes that we took. But just to summarize, the Cubans were rebelling against the Spanish, and they wanted the Americans to come in and help them. And we refused until the situation got tense enough that American property was being destroyed, and we sent a battleship down there to protect American interests, and that battleship was called the Maine, and it blew up in Havana Harbor, and that got a lot of people angry. Remember yellow journals that were kind of beating the drum for war. And then once we got involved in the war, there was a debate that erupted about what we were doing there. We were freeing the Cubans, but then we seemed to be having other opinions about other territory, like Puerto Rico and Guam and Hawaii, and most notably the Philippines, where another war breaks out, this time against us, because the Filipinos believed we were fighting for their liberation just like the Cubans, but then we decided to stay in the Philippines. And this man named Aguinaldo, Emilio Aguinaldo, started fighting against us. His name is right down here. Fighting with us against the Spanish, and then when he found out we weren't leaving, fighting against us in a very bloody insurgency that lasted nearly 2 years. The debate was, is this proper for a country that really made its name in history for being the rebel against an outside authority, against colonial power, now becoming a colonizer, becoming the very thing that we had detested? What is it? Henry James said that we puked up our ancient soul when we did this. All right, as far as terms, these terms here are all the kind of Gilded Age terms. You can use any of these you want with respect to answering any essay questions. Know particularly the unions and which unions did what. So we have National Labor Union is one. We have the Knights of Labor, the AFL, and then down here the Wobblies. So be able to identify kind of the ins and outs of these unions, and we did a worksheet on that. Other than that, you can skip kind of a lot of the Western stuff. Make sure you know assimilation and Dawes Act. And as far as the rest, I think we should all remember that. All right, let's go to our next unit, Confidence and Crisis here. And there is the yellow sheet. The first question, what events drew a very reluctant nation into war? Now remember, some students in the past have gotten mixed up about entry into World War I and entry into World War II. There are some similarities, but make sure that you don't use the word Lusitania, for instance, when you're talking about World War II. This is a World War I event. America wants to stay out, wants to stay isolated. Woodrow Wilson, the man who will eventually take us into war, wins the election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war," but eventually we get involved because of a number of things. Early on, sinkings of ships like the Lusitania and the Sussex and the Arabic, but Lusitania was sunk 2 years before we finally got involved, so that's not an immediate event. All these things kind of pile up on each other. And of course, the Zimmerman telegram being a big part of that, our entry into the war there. And then Woodrow Wilson's feelings, okay, if we're going to get into war, we're going to make this the war to end all wars. For the 1920s, what Persia changes were occurring during this time? Political, economic, religious, social, intellectual, artistic. Normalcy for the P. Normalcy here. Laissez-faire for the E. Fundamentalism for the R. Great migration and some of the changes going on with women for the S. And then A, Harlem Renaissance and so on. 1930s, these three questions were the ones that we dealt with. And the big idea here, kind of for the last two questions especially, is this kind of switch between a laissez-faire approach to a hands-on approach. Hoover wants, if he's going to help anybody, it's going to be big business. Roosevelt, he's going to try everything he can in this New Deal. The government's going to expand. And this was a very, very different approach. The causes of the Great Depression, just be able to identify a few of them. Things like overproduction, over-reliance on credit, outmoded industries, high tariffs, these sort of things. All right, well, down here, we went over in class which things you can get rid of, so I don't want to repeat myself here, and I've only got a couple seconds left. In our final unit, World War II, right here, know the isolation to involvement timeline, or the continuum it's called here, key turning point battles, like Iwo Jima, Midway, Coral Sea, Battle of the Bulge. Persia changes again, that's another important one. We talked a lot about that in class. So hopefully this reminds you, and good luck on the exam. Have a great rest of the weekend.